Welcome to the JQA treatment. Before we get into episode 5, I just wanted to say thank you to all those that are listening, and I also wanted to say thank you to all those that have given me feedback on the first couple episodes that I've done. I tried to be a little bit more robotic on the first couple episodes, and then I tried to relax on the last couple episodes. I feel I'm at a place where I can just talk to you guys about the people that I'm talking about in the JQA treatment. So with that, the further episodes, I'm going to feel a little bit more relaxed. I'm going to feel a little bit more like myself. And so I thank you for the feedback, and I hope that you will like the episodes to come. And I hope that they will get a little bit longer as we go through, because eventually I'd like these podcasts to get a little bit longer just so you can get some more information and we can get deeper into these people. But the whole point of this was to just kind of give you a little brief snippet of these people's lives to interest you just a little bit so you can look up these people on your own. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you guys, and let's get into episode 5 on George C. Marshall. He was called the organizer of victory in World War II. He built the modern U.S. military, rebuilt war-torn Europe, and laid the foundation for America's global leadership. But his legacy isn't without controversy. Did his grand vision for peace and stability come at too high a cost? Did he underestimate the Cold War's growing tensions? Now today on the JQA treatment, we're going to look at George C. Marshall. We're going to explore his life and his impact, from his early career to his pivotal role as the Army Chief of Staff, as Secretary of State, and as Secretary of Defense. We'll break down his successes, failures, and the legacy he left behind. Here we go. Before he was shaping world affairs, George C. Marshall was a career soldier. He was born in 1880 in Pennsylvania, and he graduated from the Virginia Military Institute. And unlike many military leaders of his time, he was never a battlefield commander. Instead, he was more like a strategist, a planner, and an organizer, qualities that would define his career. During World War I, he was not a famous general, of course, but he was a brilliant staff officer, helping design major offenses in France. After the war, he became one of the Army's top planners, pushing for military modernization long before the next global conflict arrived. And this is something to say about his character, is that he knew what was to come in World War I. He saw that there was already going to be future conflicts, so therefore he started to modernize, or he started to think about modernization. He gained the trust of General John J. Pershing, Douglas MacArthur, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who all saw him as one of the best minds in the military. And by 1939, as tensions in Europe were escalating, as World War I became World War II, Roosevelt personally chose him to be Army Chief of Staff, a decision that would prove critical. In fact, when Roosevelt appointed Marshall, he said that I have complete confidence in General Marshall's ability to lead the Army through these perilous times. Of course, Roosevelt was very, very dramatic. But I guess he kind of had to be, because, it's a war. When World War II broke out, George C. Marshall had one of the most difficult jobs in history, turning a small, outdated U.S. military into a force capable of defeating Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Remember, during the Great Depression, FDR had to cut the military in half. So with that, George Marshall had to kind of see what he had and use what he had in order to try to come up with some kind of way to defeat this powerful moving force that was Nazi Germany as well as Imperial Japan. Now, when Marshall became Army Chief of Staff, the U.S. Army was ranked 17th in the world, smaller than even Portugal's. Now, there's no offense to Portugal, but wow. He had pushed for rapid expansion, training millions of soldiers and equipping them with modern weapons. Now, Marshall did help coordinate the entire U.S. war effort, and he was crafting strategies alongside Eisenhower, Churchill, and even Stalin. Though many expected him to lead the D-Day invasion, he actually was the one that recommended Dwight Eisenhower instead, and that was a pretty selfless decision that prioritized victory over personal ambition. So, to kind of make a checklist out of the successes of his war leadership, he turned America into the world's greatest military power, and scholars would probably debate that, built the strategy that led to the defeat of Nazi Germany and Japan, and he laid the groundwork for America's post-war role as a global leader. Churchill even praised Marshall afterwards, saying that his leadership was indispensable to the Allied victory. Now, victory in war was one thing, securing peace was another. So after the war, Europe was in ruins and millions were displaced, and the Soviet Union was expanding its influence. The world faced a choice: help rebuild or risk another global conflict. Enter the Marshall Plan. And not Eminem, but George C. Marshall's plan. Officially called the European Recovery Program, this was a massive U.S. effort to rebuild Europe, providing over $13 billion, equivalent to over $150 billion today, in aid. It helped prevent the spread of communism by strengthening Western Europe's economies. It cemented America's influence as a global power and laid the foundation for organizations like NATO and the European Union. Marshall, when he announced this plan, said, "Our policy is directed not against any country or doctrine, but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos." And these kinds of words had to be used in the context of the Cold War, because when you use words like that, you get support from the people. You get the hearts and minds of the people, because you're trying to say that this isn't about any kind of political doctrine. This is about humanity. Now, while Marshall successfully aided Europe, his approach to China, moving further east, was seen as a failure. He attempted to mediate peace between nationalist and communist forces in China, but ultimately Mao Zedong's communists took over in 1949, which was obviously bad for the United States, because now communism is obviously spreading. So many in the US blame Marshall for losing, quote unquote, losing China, fueling the McCarthy-era suspicions. And this is where critics started attacking Marshall, and they said that the fall of China to communism is a direct result of the failures of George Marshall. And this is also the epitome of the Cold War, where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now, Marshall had hoped to retire, but war called him back once again, and in 1950, President Harry Truman asked him to serve as the Secretary of Defense to oversee the Korean War. Now, some of the successes he saw in Korea helped rebuild the military after post-World War II cuts, and he strengthened NATO and the U.S. defense system. Now, some of the conflict that he had with General MacArthur was that he wanted to escalate the war, even suggesting using nuclear weapons against China. This is MacArthur wanting this, not Marshall. And Marshall backed Truman's decision to fire MacArthur after this, and that was a move that divided public opinion. So he officially retired in 1951, and he received the Nobel Peace Prize for his diplomatic efforts. He ended up dying 8 years later in 1959, remembered as one of the greatest American statesmen of the 20th century. In fact, Eisenhower honored Marshall by saying, "No man has contributed more to the security and peace of this world than George Marshall." So how should we remember George Marshall? And let's break it down with the little bits that I've given you. So he built the U.S. military into a global superpower, orchestrated victory in World War II, created the Marshall Plan preventing economic collapse in Europe, helped shape NATO and modern U.S. defense policy, but some critics said that he lost China to communism, sparking Cold War tensions, that because of that clash with MacArthur, it fueled public anger, and that he was criticized for prioritizing diplomacy over aggressive action, especially during the time of the Cold War. In other words, Marshall was a lot of things. He was a soldier, a statesman, and a visionary. His work shaped the modern U.S. military, global alliances, and America's role as a superpower. But was his vision for peace too idealistic, or did he lay the foundation for the world order we still live in today? Next time on the JQA treatment, we turn to Andrew Mellon, one of the most powerful and controversial economic minds in American history. As Secretary of the Treasury, Mellon oversaw the booming 1920s economy and championed tax cuts, business growth, and supply-side economics. But when the Great Depression struck, was Mellon a victim of bad timing or partly responsible for the collapse? We'll break down his rise, policies, and legacy in shaping America's financial system, so don't miss it. Subscribe now and leave a review. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning history.